This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 138 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's topic is accommodation alternatives. So basically I chatted with a bunch of people about how to go travelling but not stay in hotels. As a bit of a preamble, I have to say I am not a huge fan of hotels. Some hotels are lovely and I get that, and I just, if I have to choose, I'd rather not choose a hotel. So, I mean, luxury hotels, beautiful, but somehow they make me feel uncomfortable because that's not my usual standard of life. I don't know if I'm just a spoil sport, and occasionally it's just, it's lovely, but not my usual style. And obviously my budget doesn't extend to luxury hotels too often anyway. And then a lot of just normal hotels I find, I don't know, they look the same wherever you are. They can be really noisy. It's just not my favourite place. But surprisingly, having said that, it's kind of ironic that just a couple of days before I've recorded this, I actually had a bonus mini staycation. So my son and I got to stay at a lovely hotel not far from us. I was helping out my stepmother to look after my step-nieces. So my stepmother was ill and we ended up using her hotel room to look after them. And it was lovely to just have, 24 hours in a nice hotel. It had beautiful views of the beach. I could, stare at the ocean from my bed, and that's lovely, but on the whole, I'm after some kind of alternative accommodation. And that's what my guests today are talking about. Lots and lots of different ideas. So if you are sick of staying in just hotels, or you just like to experience something different, then I'm sure that some of my guests' suggestions today will be something useful for you. But before we get to my guests, just a quick shout out for Travel Journal School. Remember, in June, I've got my 2-week course running called Start a Personal Travel Blog. If you're curious to find out more, then just head to traveljournalschool.com and you can sign up to the mailing list there, and I'll let you know when it's able to be booked and when there's more details up. So that's traveljournalschool.com. Now, my first guest today is Dan Johnston, and he has a big plan to live in lots of different places, and originally it went back to wanting to live in a bunch of different places before he turned 30. It's always a good milestone, I think, to get out there and see the world, that whole, it might be a cliche, but it's true, the before you settle down thing. So I'm a bit envious because he has lived in some really similar places to where I've lived around the world, but just more of them. But anyway, we had a good chat about how he has found accommodation in his moves around the world.
Essentially, I wanted to live in 5 different places before I turned 30. So
awesome
it was,
idea.
And I don't know, or maybe I do know where it came from, but there was some kind of alcohol involved and I was young and whatever else, but it stuck with me. And so in general, I was doing longer term stays. Now, within a place, so say I lived in Costa Rica for 4 months, and in Costa Rica, I do a 3-day trip to Jaco or Manuel Antonio or these little beaches. But generally, I was looking for long-term accommodation. And I think this was before the days of Airbnb. This was 2012 when I started. I'm not actually a big fan of Airbnb. I can go off on them if you'd like.
There's
if it will
pros
be
and cons, but I still use them a lot. So yeah, but I get
There's
it.
pros and cons, and I do sometimes use them, but I like the flexibility I find on like most hotel sites. Even when you book, like booking.com, you usually have fully refundable. So I enjoy that. But and I have found in a lot of cities now, Airbnb is more than like a decent hotel. In some places, it's getting weird, but
yeah. And there's certain places where it's really hard, like in Japan, they've changed the rules and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah. I think we'll see a shift in the next few years.
That too.
Yeah.
Definitely. So because there weren't other options, at least that I knew of, I basically got creative with it. So everywhere I lived for my first couple of years. So that included like New York, Costa Rica, Hamburg, Bologna, Italy, Barcelona. I paid local long-term rent costs, even though I was going through for like 2 to 4 months at a time. And so each one was a little bit different. Costa Rica, I showed up and I stayed with a friend for a little bit. And he happened to know someone who had a 12-month lease, had 2 months left on it, but was moving back to the U.S.
Wow.
And he got a different job. So that there were other things I was looking at there, like local classified ads, but that ended up being the best because I took over a furnished apartment on a long-term lease, paying, what he paid. And then New York, I did something similar. On Craigslist, they have a sublet category. So I found one room that was, I think, this was in East Village, and it was $1,400 a month for a room, which is pretty reasonable for, East Village, Manhattan.
Definitely,
and
yeah.
I think she was just covering her costs. Maybe she paid more than that, or less than that. I don't know. But she wanted to go travel for a month, rent out her place, right? And then I found a second apartment, same situation. I think it was someone going away for 3 weeks, and that was a little bit more because it was a 1-bedroom kind of whole apartment. But either way, it worked out that I was paying about the same rent that my friends who lived in New York long term were paying.
That's awesome.
For that short term stay.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think it's in theory what Airbnb could have been in terms of making up. Like, you're not wasting a property. I go away sometimes for a month or two, and I don't want to rent my place out to strangers at this point. But I've offered it up to like a client of mine recently, where I'm like, I'm going to be gone in July. She's one of my first clients ever. Like, if you want to stay in Prague, like, just take my place because I don't like it going to waste kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's nice to have, like, I always have a house sitter when I go away for a longer time. Yeah. One, because someone needs to look after my cats, but it's also nice to think from a security point of view there's someone in and out of your place as well. So
Definitely. Or if, the heater or the water heater leaks for, it's not going for a month. In Hamburg, we ended up, and this is a case where we might have paid a little bit more than the local rent, but going through like a furnished apartment agency. Mm-hmm. But I think then still we paid for a nice 2-bedroom in, I'm forgetting the neighborhood's name, the university neighborhood, Rotherbaum, I think it is. Mm-hmm. And I think we paid 1,100 euros each month, which seemed fairly reasonable for a short-term, furnished place.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Bologna, we went to Italy, and I looked on Craigslist, and there was one posting, and it was American. And in many cases, you can get scammed on Craigslist. Mm-hmm. I seem to have a good radar for whatever reason of picking up what is legit, because often if you look on Craigslist in cities or countries where Craigslist isn't a thing, it's just scamsters posting to get Americans.
Right.
And because why would a local be posting because they don't have Craigslist there? But Craigslist is set up in every city. It's just not active always. But this was an American woman who had been married to an Italian professor. And so they went between Bologna and America, and he had passed away, but she kind of managed the place and rented it out to students. And so it was just a very coincidental, like the one posting on Craigslist.
Yeah, and it wasn't a scam. It was a legit thing.
And it wasn't a scam.
Yeah. Awesome.
And and then in Germany, there's a lot of websites and options for flat sharing. I think it's very common. Yeah. So that was the other thing with accommodation is if you're willing to share the apartment with someone, like take a room in a larger apartment, which is very common in Europe, where you have people even in their 30s and 40s who share, like they're all single professionals and they share a big apartment. Then short term is really easy if you're like a couple months, because people aren't that high strung. They're not necessarily getting you to do a contract. And that sort of thing. So that's what I did in Barcelona and Berlin as well. Just found local postings and that.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great way also to meet some local people as well. So there's a
definitely.
bonus side to that. Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Well, you're right. I think a lot of what you've done is kind of the idea behind Airbnb, but Airbnb's kind of been taken over by just people wanting to make money. So you've found your own ways to find different possibilities. So probably takes a bit more effort, but I think would be very worthwhile. Probably saves you money and has a more kind of local and interesting experience. I think one of the big lessons from Dan's experiences is to be a bit creative and have a bit of time, a bit of lead time especially, to really look around and try and find some interesting places to stay, especially if you're trying to stay somewhere longer term. But really the same applies for any trip at all. And often it's just asking around and, who you know, and all of those things can lead to the most interesting accommodation alternatives. Now, my second guest today is Kendall Simmons, and she starts off by saying she hasn't stayed in a hotel for a long time, but she's been travelling a lot and is a digital nomad at the moment. So we have lots of things in common as well. I guess everyone who travels long term and I were fairly like-minded, but Kendall has a couple of specific suggestions which were really interesting and useful, I think.
I have not stayed in a hotel in a really long time. When my husband Kane and I travel, we actually try to avoid them if we possibly can.
Yeah. You're a girl after my own heart.
Yes, we are huge fans of a lot of different alternatives, actually. One of them are hostels, which we are not 20. We're not in university. We are in our mid-30s. And the crazy thing is that hostels in a lot of cities, especially in Europe, have gotten incredibly nice. I don't know if you've noticed that as well, but they're not backpacker hangouts anymore. Some of them are, but if you search on Hostel World and other search engines for that format, you can find incredible places that are incredibly nice, just as nice as a hotel, if not nicer, but for the same price point. A perfect example of that, last September, 2018, we were looking for accommodations fairly last minute on a trip to Venice, and accommodations in Venice are
pretty pricey usually. Yeah.
Yes, we came across a hostel that it almost looked too good to be true, to where we didn't want to book it online because it seemed like there was going to be some kind of a catch. And we showed up. The location was incredible. And there was a gorgeous courtyard with a bar, and we were drinking all these amazing cocktails, and a really cool mix of people were hanging out. It wasn't just 20-year-olds like I mentioned before. Awesome. There were people there who were clearly there for business, and there were families with kids, and there weren't any rules or age restrictions like hostels used to have, to where there was almost like a stigma. If you weren't there backpacking, you shouldn't have been there. This was basically just an incredibly casual hotel. The difference was the room was not luxurious, but it was still a private room. It was just very pared down and simple, almost kind of Scandinavian, right? Like you walked in and you had exactly what you needed and nothing more. But for the price point, I mean, we paid less than 50 euros a night for a private room.
Oh, in Venice. Wow, that is awesome. And I'm with you. I don't need all the fancy stuff. I don't even feel that comfortable having all the fancy stuff that a 4- or 5-star hotel offers. And I would much rather save my money to travel longer by staying in something like a hostel.
Well, and the way we looked at it was, okay, we're not spending a fortune on the hotel, but when you're in Venice, the whole point of being there is being out and exploring anyway.
Exactly.
So we spent more money on amazing meals and, beautiful bottles of wine and just doing all of the activities we could ever want to do because we hadn't broken the bank on a 5-star luxury hotel. So hostels, I think a lot of people, especially Americans, because hostels are not so prominent in the States. They have this vision of, bunk beds, 22 a room, for 10 euros a night, surrounded by a lot of kids, but it's just not the case anymore. Hostels are evolving just like every other type of business. And they're really catering to people that are a little bit more discerning, but also just want to get a lot more for their money. Yeah. So anyone who isn't currently considering hostels, I would just strongly recommend spend 30 minutes doing a really great Google search. And I think you're going to be surprised by what you come up with. So hostels are huge. And then here's something that is very new to me, which I'm excited about, is house sitting. Have you ever done this before?
Yes. I haven't, but I want to. I've often had house sitters look after my place, but I've had a couple of friends who've done it a bit long term, and it's a very exciting option. I agree. So tell me more about what you're going to do with house sitting.
Okay, well, we have not done it yet, but we have our first one scheduled for about 6 weeks from now. And we are going to be in Amsterdam for 16 nights in the heart of Amsterdam, right near the central train station.
Awesome.
And we've already Skyped with the homeowners, who are amazing. They're actually going to be in the United States for those 16 nights with their family. And all they need is they have two animals. They have a cat and a rabbit.
Aww.
And a beautiful condo. And the cat and rabbit don't like going into like a pet hotel.
Right. Yeah.
They're not comfortable there. And so this is their first time having house sitters, and it's our first time being house sitters. We have Skyped. We're about to Skype again tomorrow, actually. We feel like we already know them, and it's good for everyone. They're saving a fortune on pet care and pet accommodation, and we're saving a fortune on accommodation because I'm sure you know Amsterdam. We've been once before. We stayed at a pretty value conscious Airbnb the last time we were there, but it was still quite expensive to be in the city center. And so this is a way for us to be in a city we love for free. And all we have to do is kind of love on and feed and water their two cute animals for the time that we're there.
That sounds perfect.
How great is that? And so there are several online websites that you can get on and search, and there are house sits available all over the world, truly anywhere. And the dates range from a couple of nights to several months at a time to be almost a caretaker of someone's property. So I would just encourage, I don't know, it was very foreign to us, the whole idea, but friends of ours who are big time travelers turned us onto it. And the moment we went down the rabbit hole and started exploring these websites, we're thinking, oh my God, like, why haven't we heard about this? And why haven't we done it? So I have a feeling, the first one we're set up for seems like it's going to be a dream. And I have a feeling it's something we'll continue to do, indefinitely in the future.
Oh, yeah. I could definitely like to do that in the future. So I follow a few house sitting websites on Twitter, and they'll often tweet the house sitting requirements and, in these really cool exotic places for a couple of months. And I'm thinking, if only I was flexible enough. But one day I will be. And I think it's an awesome way. And you also get to see, like, sometimes you'll be in a part of a city where you wouldn't normally get to stay. And, you really get to experience the local lifestyle. So I love that idea of it.
Exactly.
Kendall and I went on to chat about Airbnb too, because we both have had some really good Airbnb experiences. But more on that perhaps in a later episode. My final guest today is Chris Haag. Now, Chris is one of those crazy kind of people who is on a very, very long bike ride. So he's actually cycling from Alaska to Argentina. He has made it to Mexico so far and has used all kinds of different accommodation alternatives along the way, especially a few ideas that I just didn't know about and probably are specific to the cycling community, but I found utterly fascinating. Now, just a quick warning, our internet connection to Chris's accommodation in Mexico was a little bit crackly, but I'm sure you can understand him well enough, just so you know. That's one of those occupational hazards when I'm talking to people all around the world. So anyway, this is the chat I had with Chris.
Traveling on a bike, I think, opens this whole other world of accommodations. And yeah, so because we've been it's been 9 months, I think, that we've been riding, and most of the time we camp. But there are a couple of resources that are just for cyclists. So there's one website that we use called Warm Showers, and it's kind of like couch surfing, which is just basically just a social networking site, sort of like Airbnb, except both of these websites are free.
Mm-hmm.
We don't use couch surfing, but Warm Showers is just for cyclists. And the cool thing about it is that most of the time it's people that have toured and traveled on a bike.
Brilliant.
So when you show up at their house, they kind of know where your mind is at. And I'll never forget the first time that we used Warm Showers. It was on this short tour across Michigan, which is where I'm from originally. And we pull into this house. It's this older couple that at some point they had ridden across the United States. And they literally handed us a clean set of pajamas.
Aww.
And they just said, you probably want to wash all of your clothes because they're probably all filthy.
Aww.
So take a shower, put these clothes on. We'll put your clothes in the wash, and dinner's cooking.
Oh, that's magic. How wonderful.
And oh yeah. And that's usually how it goes with Warm Showers. It's such a great resource for biking. And the idea is sort of that, at a minimum, you can stop in and use the shower, because when you're traveling on a bike, especially if you're camping everywhere, like that can be a pain sometimes. I can't tell you how many times I've bathed in a gas station sink.
Oh. That's not pleasant.
So Warm Showers is really, really great. Yeah.
What an awesome resource.
And then, and then a similar one that's actually only in Mexico is called RAC, Red de Apoyo, and I can't remember what the last word is. Maybe Ciclo Viajero, which is like cycle touring.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually a WhatsApp group. And this one's super cool because Warm Showers is more like Airbnb or Facebook, where you can read somebody's profile and see their picture and read reviews about them and everything. RAC is just a message group on WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm in Durango in Mexico, and I have a flat tire, or I need a place to stay, or a question about, where's there a bike shop in town, or anything, where should I go for dinner tonight? I just post it on this message group, which I think there's hundreds, if not a couple thousand people on throughout Mexico, and everybody on the group gets a message. So I've had it before where I've said, is there a safe place to camp between this town and that town? And somebody's popped up and said, well, I've got a friend in that town, so just ride 10 kilometers further. Aww. And I'll call my friend and you can stay at his house.
Wow.
And then it's this funny little web where that person calls somebody in the next town, and before you know it, you've got a place to stay for like the next 5 nights. And all these and everybody, like, sometimes they're friends, sometimes they only know each other through this network, and so that's really, really cool, I think.
That's awesome.
So I've never really been on a group like that before.
No, I had no idea such a thing would really exist, but I guess when you've got that like-minded interest like cycling, then that kind of can bring people together in, a kind of we trust each other kind of way. But that's brilliant. How cool.
Yeah. And so that one actually started, I guess it's a little bit dark the way that it came about, because maybe I think it's been a little bit over a year. There were 2 European cyclists that were murdered in Mexico.
Right. Yeah.
And so the bicycle community kind of got together and said, we need to like have some kind of support network for people that travel here. And so that's what they put together. And it's pretty big. It's kind of funny because it's like you meet people. the cycle touring world is pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
So if I meet another cyclist in Mexico that's traveling through the country, chances are they're on this message board, and I've probably like shot a note with them back and forth
That's
at some
cool.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great way to firstly to get, info and find places to stay, but also, to be able to meet local people as well who are, supportive of you cyclists. And yeah, you must come up with all sorts of interesting experiences by being able to tap into that existing network. I was really fascinated by Chris's stories of basically the supportive cycling community. It never really occurred to me that there would be kind of accommodation networks and hospitality networks set up for specific communities. There's probably some for all kinds of people, so do let me know if you know of any others. A good place to do that is in our Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers. If you just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook, you'll find us there, but there'll also be a link in the show notes. For this episode, the show notes are at notaballerina.com/138, because you have been listening to episode 138 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. A bit of a shout out to my excellent guests today. First of all, we had Dan from Dreams Around the World, and you can also look up Dan's Dreams Around the World podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Kendall you can find at kendallsimmons.com. You may remember from a previous episode, she has an online business as an interior designer and does awesome work. And finally, I chatted with Chris, first-time guest on the Thoughtful Travel podcast. So he's this crazy guy doing his bicycle odyssey through the Americas, and you can find his journey and the blog posts he writes about it at theplacesip.com, which is a pretty cool name. I'll also leave a link to Warm Showers, which is at warmshowers.org, which Chris mentioned. It describes itself as a community of bicycle tourists and those who support them. And it sounds like just an awesome place to hang out and get to know some people if you are a cyclist. So don't forget also to register your interest in my next Travel Journal School course. It's called Start a Personal Travel Blog, if you want to keep a record for yourself, or so that family and friends back home can see what you're up to and see the photos that you're taking as you go. Other than that, don't forget to check the show notes, notaballerina.com/138. And as always, thank you very, very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.